This week's psalm is a lament psalm, though the selection taken out for us to hear in worship today loses much of that in the cut-out parts. It's a strong poem song of reckoning with the state of affairs and an ardent statement of God's willingness to be with us in the presence. In the phrases we didn't hear read this morning, hear this. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye wastes away from grief, my soul and body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my misery, and my bones waste away. It is intense, this lament that the psalmist is feeling. A feeling all of us know in our lives, or will know if we haven't known it already. Living life will always come with anxiety and sadness and concern. But in the season of Easter, the intent is to move through that human experience, to focus instead on the divine presence that remains always in all things, to remain in God's steadfast love and protection. But too often, our Christian heritage has twisted that protection to be understood as an exclusive right for us and only us. Using phrases found in our gospel reading even, the intent was to push others away in fear or retaliation for those who were in the underclass. A tradition built on the need to preserve early Christian leaders like Stephen in our reading from Acts, and so many of the other martyrs of that early church. Their lives, however, are ones that we likely could not understand in our Jesus-dominant society, so far from the governance of Roman Empire, from the dominance of Jewish leadership. So it's important to note, especially in times when we hear these passages of only through Jesus, how it has been used to advance anti-Semitic ideology. It is important for us to remember that Jesus did not denounce or seek to vilify Judaism. His critique was centered on religious leaders who created impossible standards for others to follow, who chose rigid adherence to established norms over meeting human need, who sought financial gain from those seeking grace. A critique appropriate for any tradition, religious or otherwise, leaders in every age, including current Christian communities that have become lost in following this way we have found in Jesus. Jesus is the embodiment of an abundant and flourishing life in relationship with God, with the Holy One, and with creation. It's a way of being on earth as in heaven, right? The way is life. The way is an invitation to transform and find assurance both in Christ and when we act like Christ. It was to this steadfast love, this protective understanding of the way, that Stephen was seeking in glimpses at the end of his life. Stephen offers us a story of ultimate trust, one that mirrors the end of Jesus' life himself, one that connects to the lament of that psalmist who speaks words of committing their spirit into God's hands. Words that we hear often in death, that we think of as death, but are foundational to a shared experience of the world. An experience of knowing fear and sadness, knowing joy and gratitude, and seeking protection from all that ails us. Into your hands I commit my spirit, the psalmist wrote in praise of the God who makes themselves known, even when the journey is unclear. If we are to take this simple phrase seriously, it could be the heart of our worship, our work, our future planning, our memories of all that have gone before. It is in part a lament. It is in part a joy. It is the life of faith, making a commitment, welcoming God's presence on the journey, making real the invisible Spirit within us. This week I was listening to a webinar from the National UCC office, part of a series discussing the church through the lens of change, which we all know about. And in it was referenced a short article called How We Gather from 2017, an article that I still have a hard copy of in my office and a digital copy on my computer. And it sought to show the ways that the new generation was finding community in ways that previous generations found in church spaces. In this article was a renewed look at the book Bowling Alone, written in 2000, that spoke to the distancing of U.S. culture from the early 1900s and on, from the generations of joining and membership to the generations of individual selection and solitary choice. And yet now, much of that article, and certainly much of that book, have become outdated in the past few years, past the separation and technologically led revolution of this COVID pandemic. As the presenter noted, COVID has accelerated transition to tech-enabled, unbundled, and remixed community. Tech-enabled, unbundled, and remixed community. All the containers, the organizations, even the organizational patterns that we have known have undergone change. We in this community certainly know that tech-enabled ways have influenced us as well. Our cultures have changed. Not because we need to have some fight over giving in to the cultures of technology, but because tech is what offers us the opportunity to see some of those faces, to hear some of those voices that are at a distance from us, to allow worshipers who can still join in while they are on vacation, or are sick, or don't drive anymore. This tech-enabled is a part of our lives. The unbundling and the remixing of society, though, is certainly a bigger challenge. What happens now, the opportunity of this moment, is to find the new way through, the call of the church that can speak to our world, those we know now and can trace, and the future generations who are seeking other fulfillment, to expand the space in which we contemplate the ways culture encourages us to unbundle from each other, and see where that will take us and where we need to be bundled back together, where we will open to the commitments of our spirits, the hands in which we place ourselves as the hands of God. This moment in the church is about community development, reimagining, gathering anew, because we are made for connection. Through all the seasons of life and transition and change, the work of the church continues to change, as it has for generations, thousands upon thousands of years. It was enough in previous days, the last millennium, to go into a church and stand there while someone spoke in another language and performed rites in front of you. Into your hands, O God, as known through the hands of a certainly more holy person than myself, I commit my understanding of spirit. This is no longer the dominant function of church. So we adjust our understanding of attendance into membership, into a personal commitment to faith, to reading on our own and saying our own prayers. Into your hands, O God, I trust we will gather together to receive your Spirit. To a more present moment in which there are so many opportunities for engagement in all domains of life that church becomes an afterthought or is no longer relevant. But what I believe is that in this moment we can understand our relevance as a needed place in society, fulfilling the desire for connection, because in connection we center God's love. Into your hands, O God, we commit our spirits for the work needed to make real, loving acts, community space. It's a commitment to sharing that is central to this moment in time. If we are transitioning from or to and in this tech-enabled, unbundled, remixed society, it is one that is more distant than is best for our physical well-being. So being the church in this moment means finding ways to use what is now to better our bodies and our souls, to provide opportunities for space-making. We can never be content that the work of God is done, but that the sense of God's full faithfulness is a mission accomplished. It must give way to what we find and feel to be a not yet, in ways that feel possible to maintain. It isn't just about looking at God's realm as being a not yet and therefore unattainable, but a place of possible hope. We express that by how we share love through kindness and welcome and affirmation, but it must be more than that. It must be knowing in our bones and our very centers that it is God's love that we offer to each other. Harold Oliver wrote in 1994 that love is not one relationship among other relationships, but rather the supreme paradigm of the fundamentality of relatedness. Love is not something we do, it is rather what defines who we are. And though decades old, this is a quote we could come back to every day. Love is not something we do, it is rather what defines who we are. We must understand our actions as divinely guided, and therefore never exclusive. We must cling to the ideas of the many rooms in God's house, whether it's a bubble bath for a mouse, or a bed, or a kitchen table. Jesus offers this vision to the disciples to remind them that they will steadfastly be in God's love. And this reminds us, too, of that steadfast love of the psalmist, who through a lament continues to know and feel God's presence, to seek the other, even when we don't know them yet. What those on this webinar really spoke to was that the needs of society continue to be a need to connect. And yet connecting is what makes us feel the most uncomfortable, opens us to fear and vulnerability as people, afraid of rejection or difference, but that is what the church was made for, connection. So the challenge, the opportunity is to look past the easy fix, and maybe even more importantly, the fear that there are few people in the pews, so therefore we are at risk. To use this moment to center on the church's greatest gift in every age, whether that be house churches of 5 or 6, or mega churches of thousands, to allow connection, to allow that value, that gift to center our future work. We are being invited to design containers for connection. Containers for connection is what it kept being called. Not necessarily new services, but containers, be they in any format, that are open and welcoming enough to allow us to engage with each other, flexible enough to adapt with new communities and new community members to hold them. Containers engaging enough and trusting enough that we can get through the discomfort of newness, the discomfort of being face to face with one another in our distant space, so that we can find the longing that connection and community continues. The distribution systems may be what is changing in this world, but the connection is not. In our psalm today, in the lament and the trust of praise, there is hope. What the author offers to us ages later is affirmation of God's presence, that the work of faith is being done, whether we know it or not, but also invites us, themselves, to pray our way toward hope, without lying that it's easy, without anything, laying all the cards on the table and taking stock of real situations that are changing around us, whether that change is welcome or not. In the changing rhythm of religion, in the changing rhythm of our world, we find ourselves with an even greater diversity of religious belief. And so our words may change. Our ways of doing church will continue to shift. But we can hold fast to what is central and critical and engaging, that commitment to place our trust in God's hands, to take the journey, to follow the way, to seek God's constant presence today and every day. Let it be that way. Amen.